I love horror. I'm obsessed with it. I live by it. I bathe in it. There's something so amazing about watching a movie that's doing absolutely nothing besides trying to get you to violently shit yourself in fear. Its unique style of filming, the way how an audience's fear levels are entirely dictated by what daunting music is playing over seemingly a mundane scene, the interesting colour palette the director decides to use. It's such an amazing film genre. And it's even better when the film in question manages to make you too scared to try and go upstairs without a weapon afterwards. Some personal favourites of mine would be The Conjuring, The Woman in Black, Doctor Sleep, The Haunting of Hill House, Annabelle Creation, Gonjam Asylum, I definitely said that wrong, Paranormal Activity, Blair Witch, and Insidious. Each of these movies, in my opinion, are amazing. The Woman in Black is the first horror film I remember being legitimately terrified of when watching, so I'm tempted to say it's the film which has stuck with me the most, but actually, I often find myself thinking about the Insidious franchise. I think the first two Insidious movies are brilliant. The casting for the characters is great, the music is really, really strong, James fucking Wan is the director, the colour palette perfectly displays the family's emotions, and some of the angles they choose to subtly place demons are so clever. Not to mention that they contain Patrick Wilson. Do you need much more? The Insidious films felt somewhat unique amongst other demon-infested horror media. I think the idea that almost all demons in this world were presented as humans was very unique. Besides Redface, each of the demonic entities we encounter are more like souls of the damned opposed to regular demons. They don't take demonic-like forms, they all remain looking somewhat human. And I think that sort of plays into the uncanny valley theory. The demons within this world look like us. If not for a few prominent features and markings, it's almost impossible to tell them apart from the people who are alive. Now, that is cinema. Their movements are genuinely creepy, their aura makes your skin chill, and when they have the moments of playing with the characters, you'd be lying to say you felt relaxed. In my opinion, the first Insidious film is successful for one main reason. It leaves the audience wanting more. It introduces you to this universe where people are able to travel to an astral plane, where people's spirits are seduced by the souls of the damned in order for said damned souls to travel back to the real world and possess their bodies. I mean, come on, that sounds pretty cool. Admittedly, it sounds like it could become very corny, but thankfully, it never seems to. It instead manages to create a powerful and unique identity and solidify itself as a movie which will not be taken as a joke. The film quickly makes you understand the serious threat that this can pose on the family being tormented. Not for 1 second does it ever feel like they are in control of their environment. The sheer balls on Wan as well to end the film on this cliffhanger? Man, this movie was incredible. The second movie then delves even further. It continues to build on the story and world from the first film without straying too far from what made its predecessor so successful. It's also got, what I believe to be, some of the best timed jump scares in the horror genre. The acting is stellar, the music is really creepy, it's got more Patrick Wilson. What else could you want? It's another solid movie. So, what about the next two Insidious films? Well, I wasn't really interested in Chapter 3 as much as I was in the first two movies, and I thought The Last Key wasn't anything to shout about. They were fine, but I think I was starting to feel like the Insidious IP was done. They had attempted to make 2 more movies after what I considered to be their best efforts, and neither one of them managed to spawn any sort of resemblance to what came before. Sure, they had returning characters, but the movies just began to feel like lazier and lazier attempts at reigniting the same interest people had in the first 2 movies. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that the story moved on from the family who we understood and had a connection to. That's a thought that came to me when I was thinking about why I seemed so disinterested in the 3rd and 4th entries. Maybe it was because I didn't feel as connected to the new characters who were supposed to fill the shoes of the Lambert family. This was the idea floating around my mind while I was waiting to press play for Insidious the Red Door. Maybe with this latest entry, I'd be proven right and I would in fact be reminded that Insidious just needed the Lambert family in order to create the same level of interest within me. Well, I have now watched Insidious the Red Door, and I can comfortably say two things. I was right, and I was wrong. Before I continue this video and begin explaining my thought process to you, I have to warn anybody watching that this video will contain spoilers for Insidious the Red Door. If you haven't seen the film yet, and you don't want any part of it spoiled, then I highly recommend you quit watching here. Now that we've got the pleasantries out of the way, let's dive in. So Insidious the Red Door opens by giving the audience a quick recap on the Lamberts' storyline, which was probably necessary considering that it's been 11 years since we saw them last. We then return to the present day at Lorraine's funeral. We learn that since Carl wiped their memories, Josh and Dalton have been struggling with the gaps. A struggle so intense that it has resulted in the pair disconnecting and Josh and Renee separating. Dalton and Josh's relationship is now so fragmented that the mere suggestion from Renee that Josh drive Dalton to college seemed too hard a task. Regardless of this, Josh musters up the courage to take him. It was at this point I realised that the Red Door wasn't going to be about the Lambert family, but instead Josh and Dalton. I wasn't too sure how this was going to turn out, nor how I felt about it, but it's worth a shot. Once Josh leaves Dalton at university, he begins having visions. With the help of his new friend, Chris, Dalton slowly starts to access the old world which Carl helped him forget. He begins piecing his past together by painting the Red Door and rediscovering his ability to astral project. After gaining more information about his past from Foster, Dalton travels deeper into the further. Explaining to Chris that it is important he does this to understand what is going on, Dalton begins to remember everything from the previous movies. While examining mannequins positioned as him from the previous films, the red-faced demon captures him and possesses his body. In the shocking twist of the century, Chris realises that Dalton isn't acting himself. What could possibly give it away? Tries to flee and fails. Meanwhile, Josh is undergoing medical examinations to explain the things that he has been seeing, but is coming up empty-handed. That is until he is attacked. Something hunts him through his home, and just as it's about to get Josh, it gives him his Amazon package and dips. Josh begins looking into the past of the man whose documents filled the Amazon package, Ben Burton, his father. It turns out Josh has gained the ability to astral project from him. Ben was admitted to a psychiatric hospital due to his ramblings of the further and his projection abilities. With the doctors labelling it as schizophrenia, Ben decided to end his life so that he wouldn't pass on his curse to his son. While at Renee's house and relearning about the further and what happened 11 years ago, Foster shows his parents the painting that Dalton has just sent him, a picture of Josh, the night his possessed body tried to kill his family, in front of the Red Door.
He said it!
Realising that Dalton is in danger, Renee helps Josh re-enter the further where he searches for his son. Again, Josh finds Dalton, explains everything so he's up to speed with the situation, and they take their leave. The red-faced demon chases them until they get to the Red Door. Josh closes it and uses his body to keep the demon trapped behind it. Dalton returns to the real world, the pathetic attempted demons who are trying to possess his body despawn, and Josh stays behind, sacrificing himself to keep the door shut forever, protecting his family. Nah, just kidding, he doesn't die. That would take balls, something Blumhouse really doesn't have. Dalton begins to paint over the Red Door from his painting in the real world, which causes the one in the further to close up. Josh gets a moment to make his peace with the apparition of his father. He awakens in the real world, and the feel-good ending now can commence. Josh and Renee hint at making their marriage work again, and the long-awaited father-son hug ensues, and they all lived happily ever after. Okay, so the film is fine? Really, it's fine. I don't think it's one of the best movies in the franchise, but it's not appalling. However, I do have some critiques. Now, before I start my routine bitch about the movie though, I'll go over what I did like. Firstly, this movie felt more like an Insidious film than either Insidious 3 or The Last Key. It felt like a natural continuation, which is always a positive, and it definitely would have been a fitting end to the trilogy of Lambert films had they released this movie 11 years ago. I also like the levels of tension in this film. Similarly to the first two movies, I think the way they built up towards something creepy was very well done. When I think about Insidious, I personally think about the clever ways in which they do jump scares. The baby monitor, dancing queen, I still hear that voice. Floating creepy bitch, 360 jump scare bitch, the dolly zoom scream. These, in my humble opinion, are such great jump scares, solely due to the creativity of them. It's not just a random loud scary noise which didn't originate within the universe, it's diegetic audio. I also really like the colour palette of this film. It has that blue, black, grey sort of filter which the original movies did as well. It perfectly tells the audience that this world is infected with sadness, darkness, depression, coldness, confusion, and fear. Well done for retaining this, The Red Door. I would never have forgiven you had you not incorporated it. And we can't not mention the best thing about this film, something which the previous two entries did not have. The Lamberts. Seeing Josh, Dalton, Renee, the other two, it just felt right. The story was always meant to be about these characters. They are insidious. Moving on though, I do have a few problems with this movie. They're in no particular order, it's just in the order from which I had them listed. Okay, so, firstly, I didn't enjoy the divided family perspective. It was kind of a blow to the audiences from the first two films who saw this family have their hard-fought victory just to learn that, actually, they didn't win. I don't think this needed to happen. I think they did this to show the divide between Dalton and Josh, but if you ask me, the same narrative still could have been woven if the family was together. It also could have meant that we could see more of Renee, Foster and Callie. Considering that neither one of the siblings really have any screen time in any of these movies, I don't think that would have been a bad idea. Speaking of Renee, I also didn't really like the way her character was written in this film. She seems so defeated and effortless throughout the entire movie, which is a very big contrast to how we saw her before. Renee used to be fighting tooth and nail for her family, never giving up on them and doing everything in her power to make sure that they were safe. She was very in tune with her emotions and deeply in love with her husband. In The Red Door, however, Renee seems like a completely different person. She doesn't seem emotionally distraught that her child and husband don't get along. Sure, she doesn't like it, but it hardly seems like seeing two massive parts of her world not be able to speak to one another is causing her heart to break. To add to this, she seems like she's lost all feelings of love towards Josh. I don't know what the hell happened in the years where we didn't see the family, but it must have been atrocious. Josh must have told her that he wished he had never met her, or decided to watch the end of the Grand Tour without her, because she seems so far detached from him here. This came as a real shock to me. Josh and Renee's marriage was one of the most important parts of these films. Their teamwork and love allowed them to persevere so many times while fighting multiple demons. How much worse could their life be after that? Renee seems so detached, in fact, that even when Josh dies in front of her, she doesn't even react that badly. This seems like a pretty weird way to react for a man who you're thinking about inviting around for dinner later that same night.
What?
This is what I was referencing earlier, when I mentioned how I was right and wrong regarding the Lambert family's return. I know earlier I discussed how great it was that we now have the Lamberts back, but they really didn't feel like they were there. I've already covered Renee, so let's quickly go over the rest. Foster and Callie still don't exist, so there's no point even talking about them.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
And Dalton doesn't feel like the lovable kid he was in the first two movies. I think it might be due to the years of depression following his multiple experiences with demons, but regardless, he didn't seem to be the same person he once was. I also will grant that as we grow up, we change who we are, but Dalton didn't feel like Dalton this time around. And Josh? He just didn't feel alive in this movie. He didn't emote the same feelings within me watching him this time around. He felt distant from the characters, and Patrick Wilson felt pretty distant from his own character at times as well. I think he was too focused on showing the damaged side of Josh and Dalton that he forgot we're also meant to like them. Think about it from this perspective, okay? Hear me out. If we, as an audience, didn't already like these characters because of our nostalgia, how do you think we would have responded to them if this was the first movie we met them? Do you think audience members starting the Insidious franchise with these versions of the characters could fall in love with them the way that we did 11 years ago? Because my bet's no. If anyone in the comments, however, can testify against this, then please do. The new characters were fine. I mean, only one of them really got introduced, but they were fine. I don't think Chris exactly did anything negative towards the film, but she most certainly could have been erased and the story would be nearly unfazed. She could have been a good addition, but I just don't think the direction for this movie was ever about giving screen time to anyone other than Josh and Dalton. Which brings me to my next critique. Don't get me wrong, I love Josh and Dalton's characters. I think they're great. The problem I've got is that this film focused on them a little too much. When you think about it, the first two movies really did revolve around these two characters in particular. We still had moments though where they weren't the focus. We were allowed to look into other characters to see what the world looked like from their perspectives, allowing us to understand how they act and how they think. The Red Door, however, opts not to do this. There are moments where other characters get the spotlight, but it hardly feels like they're sharing it. It feels more like they're cameoing, like their agents held them at gunpoint and told them that they had to be involved. I miss Specs and Tucker. I miss Lorraine.
R.I.P.
I miss Elise. Foster and Callie seem nice, I guess. I don't think we'll ever really know though. Admittedly, Callie was a baby in every other appearance, but she didn't have anything going for her here, and there's no excuse this time around. Another problem I had with this movie is probably my most subjective opinion so far. It wasn't anywhere near as scary. Firstly, Red-Faced Demon looks nowhere as impactful as he did here. Why did they feel the need to change the colour of his eyes? The hell was that about? He looks so scary here. Why did they decide that this was somehow scarier? An argument could be made they had more room in the first film to make him scarier by teasing us with his presence, only allowing us to know he's nearby by hearing the cracking of his limbs. But that tense energy wasn't even attempted this time around. There were a few good moments, but most times it just didn't compare. I guess it's hard trying to follow up to scares like these, but that's not to say that they shouldn't have even bothered. There were times where the setup was good, but other times it was just meh, just not very Insidious-like. Another issue I have with this movie is its purpose. I get that Insidious makes money, I know that's the whole point why this film came out, but surely they were also hoping that there would be a reason for this film to exist for the story, right? Because I'm not too sure they even thought about this, because this film only does one thing, and that's make the ending of Insidious 2 obsolete. Josh and Dalton now remember, Lorraine is dead, Foster and Callie don't do anything, Specs and Tucker don't feature, and there's a chance that Josh and Renee won't get back together. This film is like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. It exists only to retcon a previously established ending. It hasn't tied up any loose ends which were left behind after the ending of Insidious 2, it just exists. This film easily could not have existed, and the ending we had years ago would actually have been better. Regardless of everything else I have said so far though, I think the main concern I have with this film is how it ended. No, not that. I want this despite all my bitching. It's this scene right here, where Elise makes her second cameo. If it was a case of her just being mystical and bestowing wisdom on Josh, I'm sure that would be cool. The problem though, is that she doesn't do this. She instead says the following.
You have a bright future ahead. You and Dalton. Keep a steady stride, Josh.
This is something which puzzled me. It's maybe considered two potential scenarios which can follow. Either Josh and Dalton's journey has come to an end with the further, and the two can now move on with their lives, or instead, Elise was hinting at the idea that this might not be the last time we see Josh and Dalton. Another movie? Another 2, 3, 4? There's no way to be sure for now, but it sure does leave me with some additional concerns. Concerns which completely transcend every other concern I have with this story. I worry that this is a hint at a revival of the Lambert story, not a conclusion. And if this is the case, I worry that they will taint what came before with new, mediocre entries. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. I literally discussed mediocre entries ruining legacies in my last video. On a serious note though, haven't the Lamberts earned the right to an ending? I think so. They went through hell together, multiple times. I don't think they need to go on any further.
Pun intended.
This is the point where I believe one of two things should happen. 1. The Lamberts move on, they get their happy ending, and the franchise continues with new characters, maybe featuring more of Elise. Or 2. The Insidious IP is laid to rest. The Lamberts, Elise, Specs and Tucker, these other people, their stories are definitively over, and we, as an audience, can watch this franchise ride off into the sunset. Anyway, what do you think? Do you think that this film was a solid entry into the franchise? Do you think it left a skid mark in the legacy? Do you think that Redface finally went to a chiropractor? Let me know in the comments below. I do think this movie is worth watching, if you like Insidious, that is. It's nowhere near as bad as these two films, and it's a perfectly fine ending to the Lambert trilogy, providing they make it that way. So, if you haven't, I'd recommend checking it out. It's definitely not the scariest horror film I've ever watched, but it's definitely not the worst.